blessed life, the happy and fulfilled life actually looks like, and his list seems crazy. And if you were just going off the top of your head, not even asking or thinking, if you looked at what human beings think is a good life, you say, that makes a lot of sense. And if you look at what Jesus says, you're like, that doesn't make any sense. And so if you're here this morning and you believe in Jesus, there's hope for you to find deeper satisfaction. And if you're not here and you're like, I don't know if I believe in this Jesus guy, what I want you to do is lean in with those questions, with the doubt and with the skepticism. Because if there's any sermon series that's gonna make you wrestle with, is Jesus a genius or an idiot? This is the series for you. And for those of you who are not sure, we're so glad you're here. And we want you to bring your whole mind, your whole heart, all of your doubts and questions, and in this series, wrestle with what is the good life? Because this week we're looking at what happens, how do we live the good life when life is not good? You see, we're looking at this list. If you have your Bibles, you can go to Matthew chapter 5. And in Matthew chapter 5, with the author, Matthew, he's one of four guys who wrote a story about Jesus' life. And he organizes chapter 5 for the very beginning to say, what is the good life? And it's the most famous sermon ever preached. And Jesus starts where there's this crowd that comes to him in the very beginning and he begins to teach them. There are religious leaders there who have come from the big cities to hear about this knucklehead kind of hillbilly guy from Galilee. You have all these Galileans who are there from the wrong side of the tracks, you know, the ones with the big straw hats and things like this, and they spit it real good. And so you have these really sophisticated and these unsophisticated folks. And to them, Jesus starts. And he said what we talked about last week. Again, if you missed it, he said, blessed are the poor in spirit. Those are blessed are those who realize that they don't have the power, but when they exchange their power, they get God's power. Blessed are those who are desperate for God's power, was week 1. And week 2 sounds just as crazy. It's this. Jesus says, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. To which I want to say, no thanks. Do you want to know how I've lived my life? Blessed are those who don't mourn, who aren't bummed out, who don't grieve, who are so strong and powerful that nothing ever gets you down. That, according to Kyle Thomsen, is the good life. Blessed are those who don't mourn. And I've lived my life this way. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. I remember when I was 14 and my parents came and said, hey, we need to talk, which is never good. And I leave my room, I walk out, and at the end of the hallway, my mom and dad are standing there, and they say, hey, we just want to let you know that mom and dad are getting divorced. To which they said, do you have any questions? Nope. I just walked back to my room and started playing video games. Why? Because if you have a screen in front of you, you never have to be sad. When there's a screen in front of you, you never have to deal with reality. And then in those times where my people would ask me, hey, how are you doing with your parents' divorce? I'd be like, I'm fine, I'm awesome. I am so spiritual and so close to Jesus, nothing can ever get close to me. That's what I thought, because I didn't understand Jesus' teaching. Again, another time, 4 years after that, I was a senior in high school, and my best friend's mom had tragically passed in the middle of the night, totally unexpected. And we go to be with him and grieve. And I think one of the things we did well was we knew he needed some time with his people, so we were together. But then I said, man, what do you do when someone's the saddest they've ever been in their life? We rented all of our favorite movie. It was back in this day where you couldn't click. You actually had to go to this place called Blockbuster. It's amazing. For those of you under the age of 30, imagine this. Imagine Netflix, but you have to get in your car and go there and then bring it back, and you may not like it anyway, and you don't like it, so you ignore it, and then you ignore it, and then they charge you more because you don't like it because you ignored it and you forgot to bring it back. It's like the worst thing ever. Don't get me wrong. There's a reason Blockbuster doesn't exist anymore. But what we did is we said, can we just distract ourselves from the pain by watching a movie? And at that time, I didn't understand, but something about it just felt wrong, and I didn't know why. But now I realize, oh, we were avoiding the grief, and it actually didn't make it better. If anything, it made it worse. A few years after that, again, as I'm growing in maturity, again, at the end of my time in graduate school, I was 25, and my grandmother passed away, and I had the honor and privilege to officiate her funeral. And so in that moment, I got the opportunity to attend to the service, attend to my mom, my aunts, and the family members who are grieving. And in that, I got to attend to everyone and lead everyone else in this grieving and this celebration process of this amazing life that she lived. And then 6 months later, I was in the middle of a church service. And for reasons I couldn't explain at the time, I just started crying. Those of you who know me, I'm not a crier. I wish I was a crier. But in this moment, I'm like weeping. I'm like, why am I weeping uncontrollably? Everyone is like, oh my gosh, my pastor's having a come to Jesus moment. I'm like, and in this moment, I realized, I'd taken all the grief from my grandma that I didn't attend to because I was attending to my family, I was attending to the service, I was attending to everyone's grief except my own. And here I am 6 months later, literally the grief has been buried in my body and in my mind, and all of a sudden it's saying, it's gotta come up. What was happening in that moment of my tears, I realized that I had lifted up the carpet, swept all my grief underneath it, and now here I am. And in this moment where I'm not armored up, trying to protect and present in a perfect way, and in that moment, in my most vulnerable moment, I went and I tripped over all of this grief, and I found myself needing to process it. And in that, I actually thought it was a moment of weakness that I couldn't hold the tears back. But what I realized was a moment of strength, because in that moment, I got to experience the relief and the freedom that grief brings. So, for those of us who are sitting there like, this Jesus guy seems crazy. Blessed are those who mourn, who grieve, who let go, who are sad. Why and how is this the good life? Well, let me just tell you, I didn't do it right. And what I learned by not doing it right was this. Let me tell you how I learned that Kyle Thomsen learned to grieve, and maybe you're like this. Jason, can you come on up here and help me with this? Can you guys give Jason a round of applause? Go ahead and stand right over here. So what I learned about how Kyle Thomsen chose to grieve was to ignore Jesus' wisdom, to be in touch with my feelings, to celebrate the good things, and to actually let go. So here's what I learned how to do. I learned that I was strong enough that I didn't know that I didn't need to grieve. So all I had to do, Jason, turn around and show these people your beautiful face. And what I learned is that instead of grieving, what I got to do is I could just carry this weight with me everywhere. And I was so strong, I didn't need to let it go. I could just hold on to it. And look at me, I was like, I'm fine. And then what happens, someone dies, and again, you carry around their memory, their legacy, and I'm like, oh, it's fine. So I can carry these weights inside of me. I can carry the memory there. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to let go. And then I'm like, I'm fine. And look, and if I still needed to play tennis or ping pong, I still had another hand there. If I needed a high five, I had to shake. If I had to do that, there it is. See, look at that. His jump shot looks a whole lot better than mine, by the way. I got invited to play softball the other day because someone did not have enough people. They had 9, they needed 10, and then afterwards they showed up and they wish I wouldn't have played because I was so bad. Having another person was not there. So this is the picture of athleticism. That has nothing to do with the sermon, sorry, this is just what's going on. So in this, I'm strong enough, I don't need to. I'm able enough, I don't have to. And then all of a sudden what happens is we have these other things that we need to grieve, and all of a sudden someone's there and you're like, oh my gosh, I lost my job. And I go and hold on to the grief, and I hold on to it, and I realize, oh my gosh, I'm clutching it tight. Why? Because I realize, oh my gosh, I need this money, I'm afraid. But here's what happens. When I start and look more closely at it, and I open it up, what I realize inside is I didn't just lose my means of financial provision. When I start looking closely at what I'm grieving, I learned, oh my gosh, I lost my identity. Because I was good at something. And the first time in my life I felt like I wasn't good, I wasn't grieving the loss of my income. I was grieving the loss of my feeling strong and powerful and capable. I lost the rhythm of going to work every day and having something to do. I lost those friends that I had. And when I started to attend to the grief, I realized it wasn't just something I could carry. It wasn't something there, but I realized the grief revealed there was more going on inside. And then we're like, that's fine, I can carry that, I got 2 hands. And then all of a sudden, we all had our lives together, and then all of a sudden this thing called the pandemic happened. Do you remember how good your life was March 1st of 2020? Remember the plans you had? Remember the vacations you had planned? Remember how great your job was gonna be? Remember how you were about to lead or go and speak at that conference, or you were gonna take your family to Disneyland or Legoland for the first time, and then all of a sudden there's a pandemic, and you're like, wait a minute, you're telling me I can't travel anymore? I remember this crazy thing. There was this time where someone said to me, hey, people are gonna start wearing masks outside on the bike path. And I said, that's never happening in America. We have an individualist we are not Southeast Asia. We don't have a collectivist mentality. People in the United States are never gonna wear masks. And then what happened is they said, hey, are you gonna shut down church service? I held an all staff meeting, 10 o'clock on a Thursday. I said, hey guys, we're not gonna be afraid of this pandemic nonsense. We're gonna continue to gather in faith instead of fear. We're not doing it. And then 6 hours later, I got everyone back in the room and said, hey, we're gonna take a Sunday off because we're not really sure what's happening. And then the next week they said, hey, Easter is like 2.5 months off. What are we gonna do? I'm like, we're for sure gonna be gathering in person by Easter. Who's gonna think we're not gonna be gathering in 2 months from now? And I'm like, oh. And in this pandemic, we started to realize, oh my gosh, we are not as strong as we thought we were, and human fragility is actually a thing. We started to realize that we didn't just lose, let me say it this way. Losing life was part of the pandemic, but we lost the lives we were living. How many weddings were missed? How many birthday parties were missed? How much social connection was gone? And then once they took away social connection, what happened is we realized how bad we were at social connection. We thought we had ride or die friends that could survive anything, but we then found out that our friendships were not strong enough to last a debate about masks and vaccinations. I'll be with you till the very end. And then we're gonna disagree on cloths and needles and know our relationships are there. So we not only lose the dreams of what could have happened, we not only lose the social connection, it's also revealed that we're the worst versions of ourselves in the midst of stress. And even though we tried to move on, the pandemic revealed something about the human heart. And now in the midst of this, I have to grieve. Do I have to grieve that things are not as they're supposed to be? Do I have to grieve that people don't agree with me? Or do I have to grieve something else deep inside of me that says, wow, when I'm not in control and feeling powerful, I become the worst version of myself. And when we attend to that grief, we realize we're not really upset about masks or things like that. What we're really mad about is that our lives feel out of control. Because we want to be God. But it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. I don't need to grieve any of that nonsense. And then there's other things that we're wrestling with here. Some of you are like, whoa, what is that? This is my golf swing, friends. Some of you are like, whoa, Kyle, that's why your score's so bad. No, my score's so bad for so many reasons. Do you know I've talked to so many of you folks, and you had dreams. Remember some of you grew up, you dreamed of being a pro athlete or a pro golfer? Or remember that time you had this dream career and it didn't happen? Or some of you, you had this dream of retiring early and then being able to spend your time playing golf, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, my dream died. I didn't think I'd be 35, 45, 55, 65, 75, and this is what my life would be like. It was supposed to be different. Oh yeah, I didn't want to be a pro golfer, but I thought I'd have this family that loved getting together, and we'd have this little Leave It to Beaver thing, and we'd love to play golf together on Saturdays, and we'd have family dinners Saturday night, then we'd all go to church together the next day, and my whole life is perfect. And now you're sitting here being like, I feel like some of my dreams have died. And some of us, what we don't realize is that when we don't attend to the grief of dreams dying, what happens is it's just like me when I swept it under the rugs. Because friends, let me tell you, dreams are alive. Dreams are part of what it means to be a human being. If you are not dreaming, you are dying. So when we have dreams about family, about friendships, about the life we're supposed to live, and it doesn't happen, it creates grief. And I'm afraid, friends, that what we do is instead of naming it and moving on and letting it go, we just say we can just push right through. And if I just take one more golf lesson, I'll be able to figure it out and I will make my dreams come true. So I don't know what your dead dreams may be. Figure it out. And I just want to stay in this moment for a second because there's people, I've had real conversations with folks. I just feel like I can't move on, though I might be belaboring this dead dreams piece. There's some of you friends who have been in relationships and then you've broken up and you're like, why is this so hard? We were only together for so many, or whatever it may be. To which I need to say to you, some of you it's so hard because you've dreamed about a future together, of being married, of having kids, about growing old together. So you didn't just lose this 6, 12, 18-month relationship. What you've lost is this dream of what life was supposed to be. Friends, let me name some pain, some dreams that's hard to talk about out loud. And for those of you that are hard, some of you have been with child and lost that child before you even met that child. And the pain is so big. And you go back and forth and says, well, I didn't even know the child, but really you had this dream of being a mom or a dad and a life you had. And in that dream, but let me be clear, the reality of that not only literally died in your belly, but what it does is it creates heartache. And what I've seen, friends, over and over is people do not stop to attend to the grief of loss, not just of loved ones, not just of dreams, not just of relationships, but all of these things we don't attend to. And what we do is we think we're strong enough to carry it without it. And when we do that, we do not get the full freedom that God brings. You see, and this is where I want to get to the crazy logic of Jesus, is this. When Jesus says, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are those who grieve, it does not mean blessed are those who feel sad for a weekend. That is not it. The process of grief is this. The process of grief is letting go, which means you first have to name, I had a dream and it didn't come true. And some of you only want to name the dream when you're on the up and up and when you're going, but once the business fails, you never say, I never thought my life would be defined by a bankruptcy. And because you're not able to name the dream and name the pain, you hold on to it. But naming it is part of the process of letting it go. You see, the wisdom that Jesus has is that we think that we're strong enough to carry it. And grief is the process of saying, I don't want to carry it, but I want to entrust it to Jesus. I want to take this pandemic thing to Jesus and say, Jesus, that was the worst 2 years of my life. And in that, I not only lost loved ones, I lost friends, I lost a sense of what is right and wrong. And in the midst of this, God, I don't understand what's happening. But in this moment where you bring grief to Jesus, something happens. You can hold on to it and bear it in your own strength, or you can do this. There's this beautiful piece of wisdom. There's an apostle, his name's Paul. He wrote 13 books or letters in the New Testament, and he's writing to this church that's in tremendous suffering. He writes to this church in a town called Thessalonica. And towards the end of this letter, this first letter he writes, he says this. He says, it's brilliant, and I want you to get this. He says to them, we do not grieve as those who have no hope. Which is brilliant for two reasons. And I think number one is he names that we all have to and need to grieve. But second, he names that you grieve differently when you have Jesus as your hope. Because when someone dies, you don't believe that death is the last word. Because we believe that Jesus defeated death on the cross, we think about grief differently. But there's also, friends, here's what I want you to do. If you're a believer in Jesus, I want you to hear this. I believe that for 9 out of 10 of us, the pandemic brought out the worst version of ourselves. And some of what we have to grieve is not the loss of a loved one, not the loss of a vacation, but some of you need to lose this idea of how great you thought you were. And in the midst of you becoming the most bitter, depressed, anxious version of yourself, you need to come and say, Jesus, there's a part of me that's alive inside that I want to grieve and I want to let go of. And Jesus, I want you to take that angry, bitter, depressed, petty part of me, and I want to lay it down here at the cross because I don't want to carry that anymore. I'm losing you, friends, so let me try this again. What I'm trying to say, what most of us do is hold on. At best, what we do, at best what we do is let go. But what we do when we bring it to Jesus is there's this process of saying, Jesus, reveal to me why this job loss was so big. And when you come and bring it into the presence of Jesus, what he does is he looks at the deepest, darkest places of your heart and realizes this was part of your identity, was being a good provider for your family. And one of the things you have to grieve and let go of is not the paycheck, but it's the identity you had as the perfect provider. And will you trade your identity as the perfect provider for one who is provided for by God, where you are no longer the Lord and leader of your finances, where Jesus is in control of that? And will you lay down that false identity here? Because the more you hold that false identity, the more you have to hold that for the rest of your life. Grief is part of God being honest that says life is not always good. Life was not always good to Jesus, who gave his life on the cross, and life is not good to you or me. This is why I love Jesus, because he loves you enough to be honest and say at times life will be no good. The second thing he goes on to say is that we go and we hold it ourselves and it weighs us down and we don't realize it. And what we call strength is actually foolishness, because we're wasting power holding something we don't have to let go of. But then there's this next piece I'm trying to get to is that there's what I'm gonna call a distinctly Christian and non-Christian way. If you don't believe in Jesus, there's still an opportunity for you to take it off and let it go so you don't have to carry it. But let me tell you, if you are a believer in Jesus, what you can do is come and bring and lay your weights to Jesus. And what you can do is say, Jesus, why did this weigh me down so much? What is going on inside of me that this grief reveals about me? You see, friends, to be totally honest, most of us were the worst version of ourselves in the pandemic, but can I tell you one of the things it revealed about me? One of the broken parts of who I am that unless I brought it to Jesus, I wouldn't realize. You see, I loved this time of our church going into the pandemic. We had these amazing plans for what was gonna happen. The staff team was all organized, ready to go. Our church was growing, and then all of a sudden, we went from a growing church to, oh my gosh, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's happening with our church finances. I don't know what's happening with our church growth and all those things. And there was this moment in the grief where I had to go from, I thought I was wrestling with what's the right way to keep people healthy, to interact with government, to care for people. And I realized in this moment, and this is a true confession of sin, friends, when I realized in my grief, there was this thing, is wasn't just grieving that there was a pandemic, I was grieving that I had a plan, and I thought I was powerful, and the church was growing, and I realized that I care more about the way the church looked and functioned, and my ability to build and execute a plan that helped us to grow more than I cared about individual people who were suffering. And in that moment is when I come to the cross, and my grief is no longer just about letting it go, but it's also a confession of sin, that I have let some things have more power over me than they should. So, you have a choice. Will you carry it? Will you let it go? Will you bring it into the presence of Jesus to say, can we take a deeper look at this? And this is your choice, friends. You have the choice. Hold it, let it go, let Jesus redeem it. Take something that's awful and make good out of it. And so, maybe you know this morning what you want to do. Hold, let go, redeem. Maybe you're not sure, but if you were gonna do it, how would you? That is what we're gonna talk about now. We're gonna transition from the problem of not grieving to the offer that Jesus gives you to redeem and transform hurt and pain, and now this practical step of how would we actually do it forward? Because if you're like me, like I was when I was 14, 18, and 25, maybe you're here like, I'm not as good as I thought. So let me give you some practical tips with it. But as we do that, give Jason a round of applause. So here we go. We started with these options. You can hold it, you can let it go, you can let Jesus redeem it. We've seen the honesty of Jesus that says, man, life is hard, whether you want to admit it or not. Even Jesus himself goes through hard times. So if you wanted to grieve, if you're here and like, all right, Kyle, tell me how I move on. Tell me how I move forward. Tell me how do I attend to these things that I've been ignoring. How do I do it? 4 things real quick. Number one is this: grieve together. Grieve together. There are places in our time and age where there are modern progress that makes life seem awesome. Give me everything from better healthcare to Uber Eats. Praise God, I'm in the 21st century. But there are things about our modern society that I believe has lost ancient wisdom, and this is one of them. One of the pieces of ancient wisdom is when we hear grieve, we hear it through a Western individual thing. And grieving for us is usually something, it's a short period of time that you do by yourself. But when Jesus says grieve, he has something that 9 out of the 10 of us don't realize. For him, grieving is something you'd always do together. So what are you talking about? You say when there was grieving, they would actually have family members come out, and sometimes they would even hire people who would be part of this grief process. And you would have literally a week, sometimes even longer, of this communal grief process where they would all do it together. And friends, what I want to tell you is grieving together is better than grieving alone. And what I want to warn you is that when you try to grieve alone, what happens is you then have to carry the whole thing by yourself. When you don't have people to talk to and say, am I crazy? Am I ever going to get over this? Can I just talk to you about this? Then you have to carry it all on your own, and grieving alone, you actually end up back more like this person who's trying to hold it. But there's also this other piece. One of the most difficult things about grief, there's so many parts. Some of the parts about grief is we don't understand why it happened. That's hard. Sometimes it's the actual pain that we're dealing with. That's hard. But sometimes in a very real way, some of you are wondering, where the heck is Jesus in the midst of it? Couldn't Jesus have prevented the diagnosis, the divorce, the division? Couldn't Jesus have done it? So you're like, where is Jesus? And in this, what I want to tell you is this is exactly why we have a picture of the cross when we talk about not grieving alone, and it's this. As best as I can tell, of all of the religions, of all the worldviews, of all of the world leaders, Jesus is the only one who's come to say, I have not come just to deliver you from your pain, but I have come to hurt with you. What Jesus came to do is say, I am not going to stay in the comfort of heaven. I'm going to come and become a vulnerable baby in a manger. I'm going to live real life, and he is going to lose his father. Some of you read the story. Where's his father? Oh yeah, he's there in the first few years. But how come when Jesus is going through arguably his most difficult trials later on in life, of temptation by the evil one, of trying to lead this spiritual revolution of dying on the cross, his dad's not there for him? He's experienced it. He's betrayed by his own friends and family members. He's accused of things that he's never done. And he literally suffers physical pain to within an inch of his own life. And in that, I tell you this, only to say this, life is not fair, I agree. But the only way that God can be considered good in the midst of your pain, especially pain that you didn't earn or deserve, is to know that there was a completely innocent God who came and suffered pain that he didn't deserve. Not only to deliver you from it, though he does and will, but also so in the midst of it, you realize that you're never alone. And in this, friends, there's great power and peace from realizing that the presence of a suffering Savior is with you. But friends, for some of you who struggle to experience the power and presence of Jesus in your pain, what I believe God does over and over is he brings you another person, one of his people, and that person becomes the embodiment of God's presence for you when you can't experience God himself. Friends, let me give you a picture of this. We have a ministry called Stephen Ministry, which is about one-to-one caregiving ministry. It's not counseling, but it's for people who are there, who are struggling, and they just need someone there. Let me just show you one testimony of someone who leaned in and did it right and chose not to grieve alone, and the comfort they received through this ministry that we have of our church, Stephen Ministry. Can you go ahead and roll that video?
Hi, my name is Pat, and I've been coming to Life Community Church for about 5 years now. My husband and I were married for 60 years. And about 5 years ago, or before he passed away, he was diagnosed with kidney disease. When I heard about the diagnosis, I felt fear. I felt I didn't know what the future held for me. I didn't know how it was going to be when he was gone. I was afraid of being alone. That Sunday, there was a presentation of Stephen Ministers, and my daughter's nudging me, like, Mom, you really need this. And I did agree with her because I was stressed, worried, scared. because I didn't know how much longer my husband would be with me. And my Stephen minister taught me or helped me learn that I was not alone. God was always there with me.
It was interesting listening to Pat tell her story. She sat right here and she talked on. And one of the things that was interesting to me was Stephen ministry. The Stephen ministers are trained. They have about 50 hours of training and kind of that one-to-one care. And there's this high value around confidentiality. We think that brings safety. And she just couldn't stop talking about her Stephen minister. She's like, am I allowed to mention her? Am I allowed to mention her by name? And all of this thing, which she just went over and over and over and said, in this moment, this person became the embodiment of God's presence, which I want to say two things about that before I move on from this grieving alone thing. One is this. I'm thinking about Pat's story. There was 5 years of wrestling with her husband's terminal disease, and now he's passed away 2 years ago, and he's still wrestling. And let me just say this, friends. I hope that you have friends who are there to walk with you. I hope you have a small group here in the church. I hope you have family that's there for you. But I say this, and I'm not trying to make a joke, but no, I'm not. I'm trying to say, when you are in extreme pain, the pain for you is going to last longer than everyone else in your life. And for you, they're going to look at you and say, how come after 6 days, 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years, have you not gotten over it? Why? Because everyone else in their life is forced to move on. And your friends, at some point, it's going to seem like they don't care anymore. And let me be clear, it's not because they don't care. It's because they don't know how to sit with you in that pain for that long. I'm just telling you, I've seen this over and over and over again, and this creates frustration. This is one of the reasons why ministries like Stephen Ministry are so helpful, especially when you're going through ongoing grief, divorce, pain, wrestling through these things, because your friend who gets together with you every single week to play pickleball or go to coffee loves you and will listen, but at some point they're like, can we just play pickleball or have coffee? Not because they don't love you, because at some point, unless you are Jesus Christ himself, at some point, our ability to suffer with other people has a limit and we're done. And I'm saying that to give you in pain hope. I'm also giving you those who are trying to support someone else hope to say you don't have to be there. Friends, this is why we're taking this moment to stop and highlight Stephen Ministry, because there's some of you who are suffering and you need someone to walk with you and not fix you. But also, there's some of you in this room who are like, the grief thing, that's not my thing. I'm actually not that. My life is awesome, and maybe for you in this moment, the admonition to not grieve alone is not about how you attend to your own grief. Maybe for you, it's how you attend to the grief of others. Maybe you're here to say, you're like, you know what? I don't need that, but I would love to be a Stephen minister who walks alongside someone else. I'd love to be part of our church's celebration of life ministry that hosts a celebration of life for people who are grieving, so I can be there to support them. Maybe you're here and you're saying, my call is not to find someone else to grieve with me in my pain, but to be the embodiment of Jesus' presence and step into somebody else's life and be that light in that dark place. Friends, no matter where you are, you have the opportunity to experience the power, presence of Jesus in grief and pain, whether it's yours or somebody else's. So, the first thing we do, if you want to do it, don't grieve alone. Second is this. If you want to take it seriously, number one, don't do it alone. Number two, give yourself time and permission. Give yourself time and permission. I want to read from you 4 verses from this wisdom book known as Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is written by Solomon, who's arguably the wisest person who ever lived until Jesus. He also was known for phenomenal success. He was a king of Israel, and they were wealthier than ever been, more powerful than they'd ever been. They had more trade alliances than ever. Their territory grew to the greatest place it's ever been. And in the midst, this man who is the picture of success, whoever your picture of success may be in your life, that person you idealize, it was perfect. He has this end-of-life memoir that talks about the true meaning of life at the end. In Ecclesiastes, he says this. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 1, he says, there's a time for everything, a season for every activity under the sun. There's a time to be born and a time to die, There's a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. What does this mean, and why am I taking my time and slowing down here? It's this. Most of us do not give ourselves enough time to deal with the weight of loss. Some of you go through a divorce, or maybe you lose a loved one to death, and you think, oh my gosh, in a matter of months or short years, I should be over it. But let me be clear, if you've been married or with that person for decades, why are we surprised it takes so long to recover? And some of us say, oh, I don't have time for it. I'm just going to go to the funeral, we'll do this thing, and we will move on faster. But let me tell you, the depth of the human heart. God has given us such great height for joy and depth for sadness. And what we have to do to be wholly human is be able to go to the tops of joy and celebration of all the good things God has done, and celebrating that good thing that you lost, but also to the depths of loss. And as we get to the full extent, that's where we become fully human, is the full range of joy and pain. And sometimes when we just want to move past it or move through it, we don't give ourselves time, and then what we do is we beat ourselves over it because I should be over it by now. I shouldn't be that upset. But also, some of us in our lives are so busy, we're like, when would I even stop? How many of this, you've had an opportunity, you go into a funeral like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna go to funeral to pay my respects and do that thing, but I really hope that the service doesn't go too long because I have a lunch meeting I have to lead, or I've got a presentation that afternoon, and so really I'm gonna sit in the back of that funeral and I'm gonna leave as if it doesn't get to this point because I'm so busy and have to move on. And I think for some of us, this time is difficult. So to that I say, some of you, you actually need to schedule time to grieve. Your life is so busy. If maybe it's career that's busy, or let me be clear, if you have kids, particularly young kids in there, you do not have time to grieve. If you have young kids who needs diapers changed and things to be held, you don't get to say, excuse me, I can't change your diaper right now. I'm attending to the grief of loss that I have. I've lost my independence, and now all of a sudden I'm grieving this. Well, what are you grieving? It's the fact that I don't have time to attend to my grief because I'm attending to your diapers. I can't grieve right now. Come on, if you don't laugh, that just sounds mean, or you haven't had kids. But in this moment, you have to say, man, I've got to schedule it. Why? Because I'd rather avoid it, or I don't have time for it. You got to schedule time. Give yourself time, schedule time, but there's another thing about this time thing. Let me just tell you, for some of you, the anniversary of that person's death will always come back to you on that day, and that's okay. For some of you, holidays will never be the same because that person should be there with you, and they should, and it's okay. For some of you, graduation and prom season will always be difficult because you lost your child before they had the opportunity to go through it, and you are in pain, and that's okay. Give yourself time to heal. Give yourself both time to grieve, but also give yourself the freedom that says, this small pain I might have forever, or more accurately, not forever. In this lifetime, sometimes the full pain and grief never goes. But when we say it's for a season, those of you who are a believer in Jesus, those of you who have faith that says that this life is not the end of it, there's hope for you in this. Because you may say, I may experience that pain in this lifetime, but in the next life, in the life that's to come, there will be no more pain, there will be no more suffering. The presence of Jesus will chase away all pain and sadness. Lost ones will be seen again. Wrongs will be made right. Injustices will be made just through God's just punishment. And in that, there's this sense that says, even though I may be hurting today, one day there will be no pain. And I may carry that pain for the rest of my life. But one day, the season of pain and suffering will be over because I know that my eternal hope and joy rests with Jesus. 1, don't do it alone. 2, give yourself time. 2 more. Number 3, this is my favorite. Write a letter to, and I just put it in my notes, ... Write a letter to ellipsis. Some of you, it's a person who's died, you can write them a letter. Some of you, it's someone who's hurt you or betrayed you. They've touched, talked, treated you in a way that is not right, and you never got an opportunity to say what you did to me was wrong. And here in a letter, you have an opportunity to write a letter that you never send and burn it and let it all go away. Let me take that back. What I'm not saying is the moment you burn that letter, everything gets better and it's all gone. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am, it's a way of letting it go, putting it back on that person's plate. Instead of having that conversation you've had with yourself over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, take it from here and put it out there so you don't have to carry it anymore. But for some of you, the letter is not to the person that hurt you, the person you lost. Some of you, the letter may be to yourself because you're disappointed in what you've done. For some of you, you're actually writing a letter back to 16-year-old version of you who did some stupid things that you still have to pay the consequence for. And by writing a letter to 16-year-old version of you, number one is you're forgiving that person and reminding them that Jesus' hope and redemption gets you through all things. And some of you have not forgiven 16-year-old you for the mistakes you've made. And this is part of the freedom and the forgiveness process, is writing that letter to themselves. But here's my favorite, because it's been the most helpful to me. For me, the letter that's most helpful is the letter I write to God, because there's times where I have questions, feelings, and emotions that I can't do. God, why did this happen? And there's times where I just can't get my head around it. God, why didn't you stop it? God, why haven't you healed me? God, why haven't you done this? And there's this place where you can be completely and totally honest with God. And let me just tell you this, God is big enough, strong enough, to secure enough to wrestle with any of your questions, any of your doubt, any of your anger, any of your feelings. There's no thought, question, feeling you have that you can bring to God that God will then push you away, or God will say, I can't handle that. But here's what we have. God knows the deepest, darkest places of your heart, even those that you've hidden from yourself that you don't know about. And he not only knows those, but he loves those and wants to attend to you in those things. And when we do this, when we write this letter, I've experienced in my life is those things that are hidden in the darkest places of my own heart, what happens is they come to light, and the light of Christ chases away the darkness, whether it be of pain or shame or sadness. And in that you realize I'm not alone because God walks with me. So, we don't do it alone. We give ourselves time. We take time to stop and write. And here's the fourth one. This is a new one for many of you. This is new for me. I've learned about this in a book that was recommended to me as I was preparing this sermon. It was this. Number 4, break something. Preferably break plates. Some of you, like, what do I do after service today? Some of you might need to come here for prayer. Some of you might need to say someone. Some of you might need to put some money in the offering bucket. We're good with all of those. But for some of you, come on, guys, just laugh with me a little. I'm trying to lighten it up. But for some of you, what you got to do is you got to go to either the dollar store or you've got to go to the thrift store, and you got to buy as many plates as you can. And what you got to do is write these things that are hurting and weighting you down. You write them there, and cathartically, you then take them and you just break them. Why? Here's why. Scripture says this. I think we get anger wrong sometimes. Sometimes we think anger is bad. And let me be clear. I want to be specific here. This is not true of everyone. This is true of some of us. But let me just say this. Sometimes women struggle to be angry because they feel like it's not okay. And sometimes men get angry when they feel powerless. The powerlessness gets undealt with, then it goes to depression, which is then undealt with, and then men seem to manifest with anger. And in society, we're told we're not allowed to be angry. But in Scripture, it says the very opposite. In Scripture, it says, be angry and do not sin. So there's things in your life that you're pissed off about and you feel out of control, and it's created brokenness and mess in your life, and you need to write that on there and just take it and just break it. Some of you, you are so upset about what someone did to you, you need to name it, take it, and break it, and sit in the brokenness because you realize that I sit in that every day. Some of you are so pissed at the current state of our world, or this side of the aisle or that side of the aisle or whatever it may be, and in this moment for you to be angry and take it and break it, and sit in your anger and sit in and say, God, I need you to put my life back together because I just can't do it. In the honesty, we experience God. In the pain, we experience God. And in that, when we take it to God, God gives us new meaning and new hope. So friends, I don't know where you are this morning. We ask this question, how do you live the good life when life isn't good? We've seen invitations to let it go. We've seen the problem of holding it on. We've seen that Jesus makes new meaning and gives us new hope. Never Band-Aids, friends, never quick fixes, never formulas, but there's ways to walk. So where are you this morning? Are there things that you've lost that you have not named and you're carrying it because you don't realize it, because you've never stopped to realize that moving to a new place was just harder than you thought it was gonna be? Because you've made the choice and you think it's not fair to grieve. Maybe it's something that you haven't named yet. Maybe it's something that you've named but you've said, oh, I'm fine, I can hold on to it myself. Maybe there's this place of you that says, oh my gosh, I need help. Or maybe for some of you, it's not that at all. Maybe like, I'm fine. But what you can do is be a person who steps into the grief of someone else. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Mourning is a part of life, something we all experience. And whether you experience something done to you or loss, or whether you step into someone else's pain, this is where we experience the power and love of Jesus. So in this moment, I want to give you opportunities to respond. Maybe you're here, and as we stand up, we sing this next song, you're like, I just need someone to talk to, I need someone to let it go. We'll have members of our prayer team here, now and then after service who would love to pray with you. Maybe there's part of you that says, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to move forward. Maybe after service you go to the 411 table or online. You can get some information about Stephen Ministries. I want to walk with someone. Maybe you're like, no, Kyle, everything about me, every part of the sermon says, it's not about me. I want to care for others. You can join Stephen Ministry team. You can pray with a friend. You can be a caregiver to someone else. And in that, we find the goodness of God even when life is not good. Let's pray. God, this is heavy and this is hard. So God, first and foremost, I pray for folks who are carrying pain and shame and loss, and I pray that you would walk with them. I pray for people who are stuck in unresolved loss, pain, anger, betrayal, and pray that you'd activate them to get unstuck. I pray for those of us who, like I have over-spiritualized or avoided it. I pray that you give them courage to lean in so that we can find the freedom of the weights being removed, of redeeming the hurt and the pain, and experiencing the true hope that only you can give. Lord, we confess that our ability is limited, but in you the hope is infinite. Let us experience the freedom that only you can bring. In Jesus' name, all God's people say,